Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of the day it might be for you. We welcome you once again to the Bible Beyond the Basics podcast. Once again, I am Pastor Jason, and this is Pastor Bob here with you. And we're continuing in our series. I think we're on number...
This is number 6.
That's right. Well, we thank you for being here, and I know what the topic is today, but I always try and come up with a good question to ask. And about this one, I've been thinking, my daughter, she's 9, she's been starting to video chat with one of her friends from school on her iPad, and has just been talking with him and really enamored. And the other day, she just said, "You know, Dad, I really like him." And we're at the point where, she's talking about, she's imagining what futures might be like with another person, and this transition that's happening. And I was just wondering, for Cain and for Abel, where did they find, did the future spouse? Was it a burgeoning romance in elementary school, or what was it? Where did they come from? Was it the county over, or?
Well, actually, that's close. That's my view, and it's not unsupported. By the way, I do have my Doctor Who Time Lord watch, so we can keep track on this.
Is that really a Doctor Who watch?
Yes, it is.
Oh, I got to look at that later.
Well, it's one that he puts his personality into it in one of the episodes.
Oh,
anyway,
yeah.
It's great. Doctor Who's. So we're going to do a little time warp and go back to the time of Cain and Abel. Okay, we'll travel on the TARDIS. Where did he find his wife? Let's just get right down to it. She was already there. This is Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is the best. And in fact, I was just chatting with some people yesterday about this. We'll go right to it, so we won't fool around. It is the garden in the land of Eden. They know there's other lands. They make reference in the text to the land of Nod. They make reference to others' rivers that are out there. So it's not as if this little garden is the only place that is the beginning of creation. No. It's much more like a community garden where you go, let's say, travel over to outside of town, and you have your vegetable plot there, and everybody else has their little vegetable plot. So the reality is, I understand the garden in the land of Eden was God's covenantal community. The people that he wanted, and as we said last week, were basically, it's an allegory of growing up and coming into a relationship with God. The other people were already out there. And in fact, we already know that because when we get to the expulsion following the murder, we're going to get into that stuff, Cain is really worried about being attacked by other people.
And if there weren't other people around, how would they know that? So it's kind of like a precursor for the whole blessed land of Israel.
Yeah.
And I think what's going on is there's a number of metaphors, there's a number of mythologies that are working themselves out in these first few chapters of Genesis. And it does make sense that it's hard to understand, because just a couple of chapters ago, we started with the creation of the whole of the cosmos. Mm-hmm. And then we go into the creation of man and woman. And then right after that, it seems like, are we skipping over something? But that if you start to understand it as more of a mythological idea or a story that they're trying to tell about the truths about God, it begins to make more sense. It's not a scientific textbook that we're reading.
No, nor a newspaper.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not science. These are theological works which are setting the stage for when the Bible really begins, as we said a couple of weeks ago, for the chapter 12, when Abraham is on the scene. Because, and you'll hear it with Babel and Noah's Ark when we get to that, because that's what's going to follow.
Everything else is prelude.
Exactly.
And even all of these ideas, when they were originally written, the first and second chapter of Genesis, were not written together. They were edited together. And even most of the prelude of Genesis was written by different people, and they're trying to put all of these ideas together, and that's going to mean that they're not going to necessarily follow chronologically or make sense in the same sort of timeline if you're just trying to write a history or whatnot.
Exactly. It's a saga that is setting the stage. Why are we in such a mess, and why do we need Abraham? For God to work not from outside in, but from inside out. To me, that's the beginning and the whole purpose of this prelude, the saga, or being an opera fan myself, which I don't know if you know that.
I think it's pretty clear. Yeah.
This is an opera. The whole series is setting us up for the climax, which is going to be Abraham. Well, and then eventually Jesus. But
but it's all building up to that Abraham. But the major narrative, especially throughout the book of Genesis and even carrying on throughout the whole Bible, is going to be carried by that story of Abraham.
Yeah, and the inward transformation. You're not going to be the external locus of control versus internal locus of control, which we try to create and cultivate within our young people, so that the reason I stop at a stoplight isn't because I'm going to get punished by the police. It's because it's a really smart thing to do.
Yeah.
And so I have that inner control as much as possible. So as far as Cain, and we never know her name. She's just there. That's a simple reference here. Here's my torn up Bible pieces. You
can tell which parts of the Bible Bob likes more than others.
Yeah. And then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Well, they know the land of Nod. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch, and he built a city.
How can there even be an east of Eden if there wasn't a land that's located outside of Eden?
Yeah.
Eden is, you have all the rivers. It's you can, like, even archaeologists can go today and say, oh, Eden, from judging from what they said about it, it would have been this land, this area right here.
Yeah. Which again ties in with the Babylonian and Persian backdrop to all these stories in the early part of the Genesis, which means Genesis, remember, is a modern work. It's not, as you said, historical or scientific. It's a modern work which is pulling together a lot of folklore, tales, and stories passed down through the ages that have been stitched together by the various schools of authorship. And it's being composed for a reason, to get across the need for Abraham and the sons of Abraham and daughters of Abraham. But it all requires the expulsion, which is, thanks to Adam and Eve. Adam, meaning male, Eve, Isha,
from the
male
land.
And female, from the land of promise, the land of where there is ease and it's bounty, and everything's taken care for, like our little babies are cared for. And now they have to go out and they have to scratch, and there's no guarantee that the earth is going to be fertile and provide the fruit you need, or the corn.
It's incredible if you look at the archaeology, or even if you look at what's going on in the modern day with everything in Israel, how much is related to rain?
Yeah.
How much is related to soil? And so much of that, Eden would have been a central place for them because that's where they got their food. They knew they were safe there. They didn't know if they left that place whether or not it would be safe. And you also think, foreign women, like, what are they going to think? Are they going to come in and are they going to try and steal our land? Are they going to try and steal our food? Because the land was... It wasn't just land. It wasn't just a house that you live in for 4 years and then sell because, you're moving through town. It was, meant to be, this is where my family lives and generations going forward. And everything that you are becomes connected with that space.
Ken Bailey, the great biblical scholar, told two stories. One, a bunch of American tourists were visiting the so-called Holy Land. I've already explained, I don't think it's the Holy Land. I think it's, just a land. It's got some interesting history. It's no holier than Honduras. But they're touring, and their guide is named Thomas. And one of the lovely Presbyterian ladies on the tour said, "Oh, when did you become a Christian?" And he replied, "Oh, the first century." And Ken Bailey also said he had some students in his seminary where they could actually trace their genealogy centuries, almost a millennia, and that was their land. This is why the Palestinian, which is both Christian and Arab, by the way, and Muslim, a lot of Palestinians are Christian, though a lot have immigrated here to the United States. This is why the policies that are happening now, which is displacing them from their heritage, is displacing them from land and soil. And beautifully, brilliantly said, the soil that they had since the time of their ancestors.
There's so much we could talk about with the Palestinian issue. And my wife and I went on a trip there a few years ago to talk to the Palestinian Christians in the area. And the amount of Palestinian Christians was incredibly low at that time, and it has fallen dramatically even since that point. But there's a lot to be said and a lot to be heard from their side of the story. But even as I think about it, the Holy Land, I remember we went to the Via Dolorosa, and we were expecting this journey is going to be this holy journey, this walk. And we start walking down the Via Dolorosa, and immediately we notice there's people hawking water. Jesus bought his water here. You look up, you see the third station of the cross. You look down and slightly to the right, and people are selling underwear. And at first we were like, what is this? This is frustrating and weird. But then I began to realize, it wasn't the place that made it holy. It was, Jesus being there, where the holiness came from. And Jesus entering into this world, into the depths of this creation. The people of God being placed in the Garden of Eden, but all of the world is creation. And so, of course, they're going to go forth.
Right.
Of course, they're going to find spouses in other nationalities. And I even think about the New Testament and the way that it was written and how it was being translated into other languages before Paul had even passed away. It was meant to be something that was meant to be shared. The whole of the story of God and the story of the gospel was meant for all people, not just us. Not just the insular world of the Garden of Eden, but it was, you might even say the Garden of Eden was meant to break out.
Well, and we'll get there, because I'm a believer the book of Ruth was written by a woman, because guess who her great-grandson is going to be? And she is not an Israeli. She is a Moabite. Anyway, so we have the expulsion, and then we have that situation between the Cain, the older brother, and Abel, the younger brother. Abel, by the way, is a pun. His name basically means breath or futility or vanity, something that is passing. There's a hint there. Cain, actually, there's allusions to his name being sort of a manufacturer. And traditional stories of the rivalry between Cain and Abel is the situation between the farmers versus the livestock, and which offering was preferred, and a rivalry between those two. I don't think that that's really the case. I think it's simply the case that Abel's offering was just pleasing to God, and that was lovely. The problem was Cain's jealousy. He could not. It's like if I'm on a soccer team with my buddies, and one of my teammates gets the most valued player. I'm going to cheer for him. It's not going to be in me to be jealous or cranky or angry. And so the disposition of Cain is the real issue, not so much some sort of a mythical combat between the different type of agricultural systems. I don't think. So it was in Cain's disposition to get angry that his brother got celebrated. especially being a younger brother, and I'm a younger brother, and I know how my older brothers tend to feel.
Yeah.
It's similar to the story of David and his older brothers. So then Cain takes him out and furtively attacks him and kills him. It just says he rose up. We don't get a description of how he killed him, but most likely it was his own hands or by a rock. In other words, it's very intimate and personal. Weapons kind of get in between.
Yeah.
And we manufacture weapons. So, and then we get that whole story of the soil. And that's going back to what you said brilliantly about the soil. It is the soil that curses Cain. God doesn't curse Cain. The soil. And so Cain is forced out and loses his soil. He becomes a refugee. He becomes a wanderer. He doesn't have a home anymore. He's homeless. And homelessness is not a lot of fun. I've dealt with it all my ministry. And then he comes across the others who he's worried about, is given the mark of Cain, which we don't really know what that is, except it could be, some people say, a tattoo, something like that. But to me, it's an affirmation that God is still going to protect him. Even though he's a murderer, he's going to be protected. He's going to bear the mark of Cain, which is a good thing. Means God still cares for him. Even though he's done dastardly things, he's still beloved of God.
And you find grace even in those early moments. God is still going with the people who have done something wrong. God is still going with the people who we might be readily apt to reject. But God is still there. God is still with them. God still hears their voice.
And then that most haunting line of the entire Bible, am I my brother's keeper? By the way, and I would ask people to look into the Bible to see how it's answered. I'm not sure it's answered. Am I my brother's keeper? And so he goes off. He's homeless. He's a refugee. And he finds his wife. The rabbinical tradition, as I think I said, was, and I'm not sure, is that it was one of his sisters. Okay. Yeah, I don't think so. Adam and Eve, they have other kids described. Following Abel's death, they get Seth and all that family genealogy, which is going to be next week, talking about the mark of Cain. And so I think what we have here is something I've always argued about, is the particularity of the gospel as opposed to the universality of the gospel. And it's what you're talking about with grace.
Yeah.
It's personal. God operates. And for me, I don't really care about the universality of Jesus. I like the particularity of Jesus.
Yeah.
And how we each individually work with Jesus and Jesus with us. And we see that already, as you say, grace. That's Jesus at play in the fourth chapter of Genesis.
The greatest power you can get out of grace is the particular grace.
Yeah.
You can say you were all forgiven, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything. But when we hear you were forgiven in this one individual moment, that's where the real meaning comes from. And God is incredibly particular throughout the whole of Scripture. Yes, God picks people, God picks families, but God also is never exclusive. He's particular for anyone who will seek God.
So for me, as we sort of sum up, because I'm looking at the time, as we sum up, for me, the story of Cain is the story of civilization. It's the emerging civilization, because we go from an agrarian farmers, shepherds and things like that, into cities, because Cain then becomes the father of cities. And to me, the compelling punchline of the whole story sequence of Cain is his descendant Lamech, who is boasting that Cain killed one. Lamech is proud because he now develops iron, which, by the way, is a bit of an anachronism, and has killed thousands. Welcome to civilization, dear friends.
Well, thank you for joining us on that note, friends. We'll see you next week.